The biggest problem is that we have this echo chamber at the very top, and we have individuals who are making decisions and guiding companies who don't necessarily understand the potential of AI. They're experiencing it as just a chat box. They're an opportunity to create content, opportunity to create images, like the basic, simple value that all these models are creating, and they're failing to see the potential for what you can build with it. The problem is it's further expanded because a lot of these companies are not really investing in hiring new college grads. That is the generation that is closer to being considered an AI native at the moment. We're not designing, the systems, we're just buying tools, but we're not, looking to redefine the operating models, right? By the time they realize that they need something, it's going to be difficult to play catch up.
Welcome to AI Marketing Pioneers, where we bring you insights from the leading minds in AI marketing. Today, we're exploring what's next for AI in marketing and employer branding, which is one of my favorite topics. And our guest here is Jose, who's the global head of core recruiting at Airbnb. Jose spent 8 years at Apple under Steve Jobs, building the legendary teams behind iPod and iPhone. And he was also Tony Fadell's trusted partner in building Nest from 30 to 1,500 people, a company Google acquired for $3.2 billion. Now he's leading global recruiting at Airbnb. I always learn so much from Jose anytime I talk to him. And few people have Jose's perspective on building world-class teams, honestly. And even fewer understand how AI is about to reshape how companies attract and win top talent. We're gonna dig into the lessons from the legendary leaders that he worked with and what founders and CMOs need to know to stay ahead in today's environment. So let's dive in. Jose, great to see you and welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. This is such a relevant and exciting topic to cover.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an exciting topic, and I think a lot of the listeners would be excited to hear more from all your personal experiences and the takeaways. Maybe to kick it off, I mean, maybe a good intro here could be with this question that I have, which is around, your experience in working with these legendary leaders like Steve Jobs and Tony Fadell. And I know you've been heavily influenced by leaders like Steve Jobs and Tony Fadell yourself. So what principles from them matter even more in the age of AI from your standpoint?
If I think about the lasting lessons, the impact, the biggest mentor lessons learned from my time at Apple and my time at Nest, it's probably that taste is the mode. You can copy, a website, you can replicate a go-to-market strategy, look, you can lower prices, you can do a lot of things, but ultimately, I think what made Apple, what it is today and what created the value of Nest was the fact that we figured out a way to create simplicity, right? Which was not easy. We defined taste, by creating an engagement with the user where the user really didn't have to think much about it. And most people don't realize the difficulty on that because that means there is a responsibility, there is a commitment into owning end-to-end details in the design. And so, if I was to pick only one lesson that I think continues to carry and build value for me, right, and one that I would love to share, is that simplicity defines taste, and taste is the ultimate mode.
Oh, that's super interesting. And that's actually particularly relevant to me as well as we build out the sort of end-to-end AI marketing agent that can take care of the overall marketing execution experience. And simplicity is actually one of the key philosophies that we have for product design. And it's really hard. I mean, people take it for granted on the front end, but everything and all the work that go behind it, I think that's just so much work until you actually figure out the core principles. So that's really interesting. Like from your standpoint, I mean, like I know like Steve Jobs himself really obsessed over simplicity. I know Tony was the same at Nest as well. What do you think would they actually hate about how companies are currently adopting or implementing AI?
I think that the probably the ultimate distaste that they would have for AI is how lazy it's making people. Right? The sense right now is that A, you can throw AI on your marketing, right, and expect your value, to increase without really thinking through what it is that you're designing and selling. But I think to me, I see it over and over and over when I talk to companies, when I talk to individuals. I think that they undervalue the potential for what AI could be, and is it almost feels that with the average company or the average user, it comes down to, hey, what are the things that I can replace so that I don't have to do them anymore? Right. And I think that's something that would drive Steve crazy. I'm sure that's something that probably drives, Tony crazy. To me, it's not about creating a replacement for something that we do today, especially if taste is your mode, right? Ultimately, I just don't believe that machine is ready to, create better taste than humans can. I think it's more about how do you look at the potential, right, with what's possible with this new technology, and how do you design an asymmetrical advantage, and how do you work backwards from there? Ultimately, it's not about creating copy. It's not about creating images, answering email, examining my calendar. Yeah, sure, those things are going to be part of it. But I think it's an opportunity to truly rethink how do we want to recreate a whole new operating system that involves both what I call the human workflow augmented by the AI task flow. If I sit here and imagine, right, their disappointment, it would be that I think most individuals, most companies are seeing it as a shortcut and therefore making them lazy.
Got it. No, that's super interesting. Maybe I think on that point, I think you touched on a couple of interesting points around taste itself and the actual human workflows and how you embed AI into the human workflows. And I know you yourself have been pretty much pioneering the actual usage of AI in everything you do, which is very impressive when you share some of the use cases that you had. But maybe like one follow-up question here is what are the biggest differences you see between how elite companies use AI versus how the average brand is using it today? Like, what do you see as the biggest difference right now?
Again, I'll go back to the lazy comment, right, that I had before. I think the companies today are seeing AI as an opportunity to save money, save time, right? And I think that we are going to see in my world, for example, right? I am forecasting that someone is going to come up with a recruiting in a chat box. Unfortunately, I do see many companies rushing to replace their recruiting operations with a chatbot. But the problem to me is that you're not thinking through what are the problems that you need to solve in order to create more value, not just
Hmm.
save money. And what most companies are going to end up realizing is that adopting AI, right, is not going to solve the problems, is not going to make for a better experience, is not necessarily going to make for a better outcome, right? For two reasons. Again, you're completely replacing, right, the individuals that can think through the systemic design, right, the operating system view of things, right, and you're bringing in tools that have been trained on flaw models. And to me, what we're going to see is a speed to the mediocrity that most companies deliver today, right? And so to me, I think the average brands are going to look to automate tasks, right? They're going to look to replace people. They're going to look to save money, right? The elite brands, I think they're not going to ask themselves, what can AI do? But they're going to be looking into, hey, where can I, compound an advantage? Right? What are the things that I can do to free, right, my people from having to do, administrative repetitive tasks, right? And instead think about how do we utilize a go-to-market philosophy, right? How do we figure out ways to get better signals from the market? How do we make sure that we have a standardization of clean data, right? And how do we create loopholes so that we can be reading those loopholes, right? And making adjustments, right? And creating better decisions and therefore training the system better. So to me, it's going to be a difference between I'm just going to buy and use tools, or I'm going to actually think about redesigning how I operate from a systems perspective.
Okay, that's super interesting. And one thing that's particularly interesting to me at a personal level too is just thinking about how we would actually design and build out a team in today's technology versus like trying to basically implement AI incrementally in the existing org structure. So from that standpoint, startups like us have the advantage because we're basically starting from scratch and think a lot about how we can actually make the most out of AI. So that's just really interesting. And kind of related to that, based on your experience, and especially maybe at your current company, Airbnb, which I know is making a lot of big, impressive AI bets, both internally and externally, which AI use cases are actually creating leverage right now, and which ones are mostly hype from your standpoint?
Yeah. Well, impossible for me to talk about what's happening at
Yep.
Airbnb in the moment, but I'll give you a personal perspective. To me, what is the hype? I'll give you a personal experience working with AI technology since the Nest lab days, right? Most people don't realize that Nest was actually, an earlier AI implementation. In my career, have evolved from Nest to my own, engagement HR systems company that I co-founded, where we utilize algorithms to look for patterns, to Humane, and now in my present position. But over the past, 12 months, I think that I have gone from assuming that things like Chat GPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama, can do simple tasks for us that are going to create benefits, right? To taking a step back and having an understanding that if I ask, one of those models to create a presentation for me, right? Where are they getting that information from? Right. And how rich is that information, those data points, right? And so what I end up realizing is that whenever I ask, for one of those models to create something for me, it felt as if it was incomplete. It felt as if it was, partial, right? And more importantly, it felt as if it had any real thought or expertise, coming from me. And the reason being the data that they were analyzing was pretty basic, right? In terms of, things that I was inputting. Today, I realize that it's not about creating a document or a presentation, right, at the point of having to deliver it and at the point of timing. But instead, I'm taking a step back, right? And I'm recognizing that I have to tie in all of my different points of views, all of the
Mhm.
information that I collected, everything that I have written in the past, right, to come together. But instead of allowing the system to, just, craft a copy or create content for me, I find that it's most useful if I do it myself first, right? And I just dump as much as I can, right? But not, to have that information be compounded, compacted, and, fixing the various, mistakes that I make when I'm writing, but engaging in creating a system where I'm utilizing technology to be a thought partner, to be a coach, right? That will ask questions, probe into my thinking, bring back ideas that I have implemented or shared in the past, right, and help me to create something better. And so to me, I think that's the future. And I'll give you a great example. When I was working at Humane, right, we had the AI pin, which I miss tremendously today. And the reason being is that I have an hour and 20-minute commute into the office, and I am one of those individuals that loves being in office. But one of the main benefits from technology was the ability for me to engage. and do research and have conversations and learn about what was happening in the market, every single day, and have an exchange of ideas to where I was training my own model. Today I do the same thing, right? But instead of having the pin, I use my smartphone. How do I design the compounding advantage, right? The asymmetrical advantage that I can do by having a system that allows me to better organize my thoughts, that allows me to bypass and break the recency bias, right? And helps me to remind of previous points or previous outcomes in order to create, something better. And as I start to think about how do I design that into an operating system for me and my team, I'm looking for ways to anticipate those needs, right? And have those questions that is being asked in conversation today, but be, ahead of the need, ahead of the individual having, enough time to think about it. And how do we do that? Is we do that by making sure that we have clean data, that we have organized the right inputs, that we're looking at, at the right structure and design, right? So that we can create a real, forecast. And that real forecast is going to be created not to make an automated decision, right? But to inform the human, right? In order to make, that final decision. And again, right, make that final decision with that personal hunch, right? With that personal knowledge, with, the taste being the ultimate mode, right? And figuring out how to push back in order to create a more simplistic offering or simplistic outcome.
Yeah, got it. That's super interesting. I'm also a big fan of talking to my smartphone while driving with the cloud in my case, but it's always a good sort of a thought sparring partner. And I think how you actually make it like almost like a true chip of step for you with all the context and the knowledge about you, everything that you do real time. I think that's actually a pretty big opportunity for different products, I think. So that's super interesting.
It's impossible, right? I'm on average, I think I have about, 10 to 15 meetings a day, right? So it's hard for me to sit there and think about understanding my industry, understanding my sector, my
Right.
focus, right? I do a good job through those meetings of understanding what's happening internally. But if that's all that you're using to base a decision on, you're creating this vacuum, you're creating this echo chamber, right? And what I love about, technology, right, is that AI can help me to accumulate everything that's happening outside of me, things that I probably wouldn't have time to go discover, to go find, and probably even less time to figure out how to organize those things, to bring them into a thinking process. And to me, that is the value of technology. It's just like you said, a chief of staff, someone who's going to inform me, right, and create a balance between the echo chamber that I'm creating internally within my group, my organization, and the company, right, with what is happening outside, so that when we're making decisions, right, we have a more competitive advantage of it. And I can think about, right, how to best communicate. And again, how to create that moat, how to create a simplistic, tasteful, outcome that hopefully will make an advantage decision for us.
Got it. That totally makes sense. And you talked briefly about how you're thinking about AI in your day-to-day job in leading the entire recruiting practice at Airbnb. And I'm curious, especially given that you've been leading all these teams. I mean, most recently at Humane as well, where you were chief people officer, building out the team and like leading through some of the most impressive transitions in the company's history as well. But when it comes to employer branding and how companies attract top talent today, how is AI fundamentally changing like everything in your field right now, and like where do you see it evolving?
There is that business book, Blue Oceans, and that's how I think about it, right? To me, if we're talking recruiting, if we're talking about employment branding, everyone's doing the same thing. For what reason, know that everyone wants to go towards the right ocean, right? When everyone is just, trying to fit into an overly crowded market space, right? And they're going after the same individuals over and over and over. To me, I look at recruiting in the same lens that a CMO, looks at that, ideal customer profile. In my case, it's ideal candidate profile, right? What does that individual look like? What is that persona, right? What really matters to them? How do we best communicate with them? And it allows us the opportunity to do that at scale, right? Allows us the opportunity to create, messaging and branding, in real time, and be constantly, testing it. And throughout all those engagements, it allows us to really extract, right, the valuable lessons, the knowledge from all the engagements that are happening across a group of 161 people in my org, right? And puts it all into a nice contextual structure where we can learn from pattern recognitions. We can learn from that ICP identification, right? And be able to, if I haven't experienced, those challenges in attracting a candidate or closing a candidate, with an offer in hand, it allows me to look at scale what has happened in the organization historically, right? It allows me to review all of the engagements that we have with this individual to get a sense for what are the open items, right? That are most likely
Mhm.
preventing this individual from accepting the job description. And it makes me, the recruiter, right, that much more valuable because I'm learning on the go, right? I'm being guided with information around it. And the way in which we're looking at designing our system, it's not about creating a situation where I'm sitting here and I'm reading, something that is coming out, right? But it's providing coaching ahead of that conversation, right? Giving us a recap of what has transpired, giving us an assessment of what the market looks like externally. What are the values internally? How does this match against what we have learned about this individual, and helping me to recognize those open items that may need to be addressed, right, and adjudicated in order for for this candidate to to accept. And so we really are bringing that go to market strategy. We're learning a lot from the world of marketing, right? And how do we implement this? And with the understanding that you can't just market, to the entire world, right? You really have to, take that funnel, right? That is quite large, right? And condense it into the actual, targets, that ICP that you're looking for. And to be honest with you, I'm just not sure that in my industry we could have done that, right? Without the emergence of technology, without the emergence of tools, right? I mean, even if it comes down to, just listening opportunities in the market to understand how the market is it's feeling, and what's happening, that in itself would be almost impossible. You just don't have, enough budget to cover the people hours that it would take to do that. And so there are a lot of cool things that are taking place. I wish that I could go into more detail, but we're still deciding, right? How the structure works. But what I share with you is that basic high level thinking
Mhm.
of how we are, moving away from, just throwing, as the old saying goes, spaghetti to the wall, right? And being more methodical, utilizing psychology, right? In terms of understanding not just, what the ICP looks like, but how do you better connect? How do you stimulate, like, the heart, the mind, and the gut of those individuals? And so, we're marrying all of this together. And instead of sending recruiters, right, to go learn these things at workshops, in settings where they're probably going to retain, if we're lucky, 10% of the knowledge, right? We're utilizing every engagement and every opportunity, to coach and mentor. I have a big saying within the team, which is, hey, just look for a 1% improvement week over week, right? Because eventually that's going to compound. And technology today allows us to understand that. And again, it could be from understanding how the market is behaving, right, to understanding how we're behaving, through the process, and not just me as an individual, but the collection of 161 people that work in the org.
Got it. No, that's super interesting. It's fascinating that what you just described is actually very relevant to how a lot of marketers are actually thinking about implementing AI as well. Because like essentially you're coming up with almost like a super intelligence or analysis layer that basically help to augment your team in doing more strategic and impactful work versus simply putting up a chatbot and expecting it to do like mass spam email and then I get try to sort of catch something at volume, which I think in some cases may work, but I think like a much more sophisticated use case right now is just really, leveraging the AI deep in your existing human workflow, augmenting your data, augmenting your intelligence overall to make better impactful decisions. So that's fascinating.
It's my sense from talking to a lot of people a day, or I should say, over a week externally, I get the sense that everyone assumes that the shift that is happening in terms of creating value out of AI, it's around, how do we create better content or how do we create better chatbots? Like, everyone is, I get frustrated when I hear, oh, we created this great, chatbots that, can be programmed to answer questions, right? And the question that I immediately go, towards is, but why are people needing to have those questions answered? Like, what's
Hmm.
missing, right? That is creating that need and creating that extra step around it. And so to me, it's more about how can AI be embedded directly into decision making loops and how can we extract learnings around that so people are not going to have questions, right? Into the future. To me, actually this weekend I was looking, I was looking into, going to the Nutcracker and I had to receive my tickets and I went into the FAQs and I'm going, this FAQs like are leading me nowhere. Right. And is anyone even tracking the effectiveness of this FAQs? When was the last time this FAQs were reviewed? Right. And more importantly, like what are the issues that would lead someone like me to desperately have to look for where my tickets are, an hour before the performance? And how can we learn from that so that, right, that distasteful experience, right, that would, send Steve into a frenzy, right, disappears. And instead, magically, an hour before, I'm looking to leave my front door to go to this valet, right? Everything is just magically in front of me and I don't have to worry about anything. And so that to me, it's the, that's to me is going to separate the companies who are going to be highly successful, right? In an age of AI, right? From those who are actually going to take advantage of the opportunity to design those decision making learning loops, into it and really embed into, again, a rethinking of how we operate versus just creating smarter chatbots. To me, the FAQ, right? The FAQ is it's a it's a failed user experience for a customer that is just going to be sped up to mediocrity by just creating better chat boxes. The fact that I'm asking where my tickets are, right? It's not about having a chat box that's going to try and help me figure it out, and which by the way it didn't, right? But hopefully will help to figure out what is the breakdown, in the system that allows for me to not see, find, or receive my tickets.
Oh, that's really insightful. I can sense like a bunch of interesting business opportunities or product opportunities just
Especially marketing.
from that single, yeah, from that single insight. That's really interesting. Yeah, I would love to come back to this and discuss this more offline with you. But that's fascinating. Um, from that standpoint, um, like maybe like your specific insight around being able to kind of step back and really think about the core, almost like a jobs to be done for anything that people are trying to do, whether it's employer branding or the actual transactional experience that you just talked about in purchasing a ticket. Um, would you say that's something that the leaders that you work with, even like I know Tony himself was very, very principled thinker, and Steve Jobs himself was pretty much the sort of icon of that in many ways. Like, would you say that's one of the sort of big insights that you learned from them? Like any interesting sort of snippets or episodes where you can highlight and share with the listeners on that front?
It's interesting. It's interesting, right? Because there is a massive shift happening, right? And it's good to borrow ideas from the past, but it's not good to try to replicate ideas from the past because it's a whole new
Mm,
paradigm, whole new sets of valuable opportunities, right? And to me, right, I've been in the industry for almost 3 decades, right? And I've seen some pretty drastic shifts. What worked during the internet buzz and then the internet exponential work didn't necessarily quite translate into creating a great mobile experience, right? You couldn't just take a website and just shrink it into a rectangle and assume that that was tasteful and simple, right? And to me, how do we go from a mobile world to an AI world? And I think that what we have to do is if we have the access, if we have the access and the ability to understand, right, legacy across an industry, let's say, right? Like marketing, if we have the opportunity to utilize, tools like Enrich Life is creating that allows us the opportunity to have a real-time listening skill, right? Could we think about how do we, embed, the future of AI again into the process, right? Into how we operate and create a systemic new structure, right? To me, right, that is going to be the ultimate value, right? How can you get me to think differently because I have ongoing sets of data, new signals that allow me to better analyze, things, and how can I use that analysis and those decisions to continue to adjust the loops, that we're designing and creating, and to me, right, those companies that figured those things out are going to create the next Steves, the next Tonys, right? The next leaders. And so I think that we should borrow and bring forth principles. But I think that the majority of those principles or the ultimate value of those principles that we need to bring forward is the ability to not be fearful, right? The ability
mm,
to ask, to ask how, why, what, right? And not just accept what is being given us, the ability to not rush, right? To just implement, the two letters AI into everything that we do, but to think about how do we design and embed, right? We should take those principles, right? But try and figure out how do we apply it to now, because what we created, with the first personal computer, as successful as the Mac line has been, what we created, right, in terms of the value that, the smartphones created, especially the iPhone, we just didn't take the Mac solution and shoved it and crammed it and beat it into a smaller, package. No, we thought through it, and we did that by, trying to figure out how do we create a simplistic, tasteful experience that provides value, right? And we did that not by just buying things off the shelves, but by really trying to own as much of the end-to-end experience as we can. And I think that now we need to take advantage of that. With the biggest difference is that we don't have to necessarily create everything. There are companies creating amazing tools, but it's not about taking those tools and just dropping them into a set of tools. I hate when people call, technology stack a collection of tools and systems. But no, how do you think about that layer that you need to design, right? And how do you implement some of these tools and systems into it so that you can have a simple outcome that allows a human in charge who should be making the final decision to have the up to the last minute information on what's happening. And that's something that I don't think we have ever seen before, right? And as much as I love my time, with IoT, as much as I love my time with mobile, as much as I love my time with the internet and the tools, and before that with the semiconductor, you know, again, I bring forth the principles, but I forget the actual products. I forget the actual, I'm not trying to replicate those things. I'm trying to figure out how to redesign and invent new experiences with the principles, not with the examples, not with the actual, blueprints from the past.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, this is precisely why I always love chatting with you because you always kind of have that sort of mixture of the sort of a legacy knowledge and insights, and then also kind of reinventing the thinking and the knowledge with the latest technology and what's needed from the actual customer standpoint. So that's really interesting. Like one interesting question that I have, especially given where you sit right now, is what does AI native actually mean from the standpoint of candidates or even employer branding standpoint? Um, I think there's a lot of hype and confusion around what AI native actually means and what a company needs to do as an employer to be really competitive in today's market, especially when you have all these major companies going very aggressive with their hiring campaigns. But like based on what you see in today's market, do you think like being AI native is going to be almost like a sort of table stakes in hiring expectations? Just like, remote first or flexible work was a couple of years ago. I'm curious to hear what you see right now.
It has to be table stakes, right? Anyone who's not already thinking about AI, it's a zombie, right? They're dead and they just don't know it yet. And I think there's going to be a lot of major brands that are going to experience that in this decade, right? I really do believe over the next 5 years, right, we're going to see the erosion of legacy established brands who refuse to change. If I set that aside, right, the biggest problem that most companies are going to face is that they get so fixated on things that they've done in the past, right? They get so fixated in how they operate and how successful they have been. But the world's changing, the world's evolving, and the world's changing and evolving at an even more aggressive, rapid pace than we ever seen before, right? In some of the things that I'm seeing today from an employment perspective, we are going to see the disappearance of a lot of companies who are refusing to understand the value of AI, right? And assume that it's something that they can just wait and see for the market to develop on whether or not they're going to adopt. Those companies are going to disappear. We're going to see a lot of legacy brands that are not going to be here, right? And probably the main provocation for that is the fact that at the very top they have leaders. We're stuck in that echo chamber. Hey, we've been successful for a while. Why do we have to change? And the thing is, change is the one constant, but change is also the hardest thing to go through, right? And so to me, the biggest problem is that we have this echo chamber at the very top, right? And we have individuals who are making decisions and guiding companies who don't necessarily understand the potential of AI, and they're not trying. They're not, they're chatboxing instead of trying to design an entire system, around the operational opportunities to create asymmetrical advantages. What we're seeing potentially is the inability to understand the market, and therefore, when we're talking about digital natives, right? It's we know at the very top people who are using smart chart boxes. There are a lot of companies out there who are either waiting to see what AI is going to develop into, right? Or
Mm.
not appreciating the potential for AI because they're experiencing it as just a chat box, right? Or an opportunity to create content, opportunity to create images, like the basic, simple value that all those models are creating, right? And they're failing to see the potential for what you can build with it, right? They're failing to structure and organize, operational redesigns, right? Build it into the entirety of the system. And the problem is it's further expanded because a lot of these companies, most companies right now, are not really investing in hiring new college grads. And to me, that is the generation that is closer to being considered an AI native at the moment, right? And the reasons why we're not doing that is because of our simple comprehension of the value potential, right, that could be created. And we just assume, well, we'll just, get a bunch of licensees for Chatbox. And, there's not going to be a need for, all these, interns or early career hires, to make an impact. And what's going to end up happening is that we are going to create that vacuum, that echo chamber at the very top, where individuals are not going to comprehend exactly what could be possible, right? We're not designing, the systems, we're just buying tools, but we're not, looking to, redefine the operating models, right? Build accountability, build, features, loops, and opportunities, right? And not looking to upgrade, how we operate. And by the time they realize, right, that they need something, it's going to be difficult, to play catch up. We're operating in the fastest changing era that humans have ever seen. It's not about hiring individuals that, again, that understand, what is a chat box and know how to use a chat box, but hiring individuals that have a mindset in terms of how do we take all these available tools, right? How do we take the enriched labs, right? And how do we apply them into a broader redesign of how we operate? And until we comprehend that, until we understand that that is, how we build, an AI native strategy to our workforce, we're never going to understand the full potential. We're never going to unlock that full potential.
Got it. That makes sense. It's a fascinating to see the transformation and also your comparison of this transformation to the internet age and also the mobile and even the IoT transformation. But it's also surprising to hear you say that it's actually much bigger than those waves in many ways, and it's a it's such a fun time to be in and basically see the transformation in and out ourselves. So maybe in that lens, maybe like my last question here is if you had to give maybe one piece of advice to today's founders or CMOs or the actual marketing operators or even within HR function and that are caring a lot about the employer branding from the standpoint of candidate experience and the employer branding in general, like what piece of advice would you give regarding using AI over the next 12 months? And like what are some of the things that they should be thinking about and should be doing right away as we get ready for the full transformation?
Great question. To me, founders, marketers, first movers are going to have to, move away from the assumption that AI can make us faster, that AI can make us cheaper, that AI can create value. We're going to have to move away from that, right? That's not how you make a decision. Those are byproducts of a well-designed strategy around understanding where can we create asymmetrical advantages, right? Where can we create those durable, reproducible advantages that are going to compound in value time over time if we're doing it right? And they're going to have to start to take a step back, right? And analyze not where you can, just fit tools, right? And implement, localized changes, but start to think about it from a platform that is the entirety of your business, right? If I'm in marketing, like what are my marketing responsibilities from end to end? What do I own? What am I really good at, right? Most likely is going to be understanding the creativity, the brand, the tone, the modalities in which we connect with the ICP, right? And how do we start to create an amplification of those values that our people bring by bringing the right tools into place, by creating, right, a true technology stack, not just a collection of tools, right, that connect into one another. Start to think about what are the problems that you need to solve, not want to solve, but you need to solve, right? And how can you do it in a way where you create this asymmetrical, durable, and reproducible, advantage? And to me, I think that is the most basic advice that I can give someone that is thinking about, their future as it relates to AI, right? And again, the competitive advantage is not in terms of making it faster. It's not just in terms of saving money. If you're doing that, you're stepping over dollar bills, right, to pick up change. Like you really have to think about it from a full systemic redesign.
Got it. No, that's super insightful, and thanks for sharing that, Jose. Oh, this has been absolutely fun chat, and I always find so many new insights anytime I talk to you. So thanks again for sharing
Thank you.
everything. And so until next time, we'll try to stick to your takeaways and lessons today. And thanks, Jose, for being with us. And until next time. Thanks for tuning in to AI Marketing Pioneers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Stay tuned for the next episode where we bring you insights from the leading minds in AI marketing.